I'm Joyce Graff. I'm with The Powerful Patient, and I have with me this morning the director of the Precision Vaccines Program at the Children's Hospital in Boston. This is Dr. Ofer Levy. Good morning, Dr. Levy.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I've been talking with a number of experts recently about what it takes to end a pandemic and how are we going to finally get back to a reasonably normal life. And the more I think about it, one of the key elements in ending a pandemic is a vaccine. We've seen that before. For example, smallpox. In the 20th century, 300 million people died of smallpox. And yet, today it's off the planet. We don't have to worry about smallpox anymore. Diphtheria, in 1921 alone, there were 206,000 cases of diphtheria, and parents don't worry about diphtheria anymore. I think there are probably only a dozen cases in the world in the last year. And polio, in the 1940s and 50s, my father wouldn't let me go to a public swimming pool because of concerns about polio. And it killed or paralyzed 500,000 people a year in the 1940s and 1950s. So we have the freedom not to worry about these diseases today because of vaccines. And so I know that vaccines are in our future, and I wanted to talk with you about the safety of vaccines. I hear from people that they're worried about when we're going to get a vaccine, but even more than that, who's making these vaccines? What are their motives? Will I be willing to accept a vaccine? And more importantly, will I be willing for my children to accept a vaccine? So what can you tell us about the development of vaccines, specifically for coronavirus, but obviously we're learning lessons from history. So fill us in on what we need to know about vaccine development.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that thoughtful introduction and question, Joyce. And you really put your fingers on some of the key scientific and policy questions of our lifetime. You know, I am a trained pediatric infectious disease clinician, and I have studied infectious diseases my whole adult life. And I have read about the great influenza, you know, in the early 1900s, but nothing prepares you for actually living through a pandemic. You know,
right.
Our intellect so people are grappling with this on many levels. I think that the public health interventions are key, of course, the good hand washing, the social distancing, the face masks. People have heard about it ad nauseum, but if we could get our face mask usage up to 95%, we will save hundreds of thousands of lives in the United States alone. So I know our focus today is vaccines, but let's not forget the simple things. Now, vaccine will be a game changer here. And, but we'll still need the other elements. Let's not lose sight of them. But vaccine can be an absolute game changer here. And, you know, one of my mentors in the field of vaccinology is a very prominent researcher named Stanley Plotkin. I don't know if you've heard his name, but Stan is like the grandfather of vaccinology in the United States. He edits the main textbook of vaccinology, and he has a great quote, which basically says, "It is hard to overstate the beneficial impact of vaccines across human history, for global health, and in these United States." And you highlighted some of the examples, smallpox, polio. These are relics of the past. Most people don't think about these anymore. And yet you cited huge numbers of people, not just abroad, but here in the United States.
Right.
Death or permanent disability not too long ago. So we really have to bear in mind how important the vaccine research really is, and to support that through the National Institutes of Health, which deploys public funds, and we thank the taxpayers of these United States and other organizations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rotary, so many organizations and foundations that you're familiar with across the world, CEPI, European Union, et cetera. The list goes on and on, UNICEF, WHO. But this nexus of organizations is absolutely critical, and the finances, and in the United States, we have put forward significant public funds towards a vaccine effort. You've heard of the Operation Warp Speed from the administration, from the Trump administration, and they have invested significant amounts of money in, I believe, approximately 6, lead candidate vaccines. These are targeting this coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, that's causing the current pandemic. And these vaccines largely are targeting the spike protein. We all know that coronaviruses look like a ball with spikes on it. And so the idea is if the human body encounters the spike protein in a vaccine, the body will mount an immunologic response to that, including making antibodies against the spike. And we believe, as a scientific community, that if the human body has the right kind of antibodies against the spike, that surface projection from that ball, right? Coronavirus is like a ball with spikes. We hope that if we induce the right kinds of antibodies in our body, that will block the ability of this virus to infect our cells. And that's really, the theory behind all these vaccines. They deliver the spike in different ways, some of them with nucleic acids, and that's very innovative. There has never before been a nucleic acid vaccine where you inject the RNA that encodes the spike into the body, and then the RNA gets expressed in your body as a spike protein, and then your body responds to it. That's from a company called Moderna in Cambridge. There are others, right? Pfizer and other companies, Merck and others involved. I won't list them all, but each of them has promising features. We wish them all the best. Right now, there is no licensed coronavirus vaccine in these United States. There are abroad. The Chinese government announced a vaccine that I believe they use in the military. But again, a lot of the research in China is rather secretive. We don't see all the scientific data. It's hard for me to render a lot of opinions about it other than to see headlines that the Chinese have something that they might use among their military personnel. And I believe the government of Russia has announced that they have a vaccine in advanced stages and even potentially deployed. Again, my impression is that we don't know all the information about it. We hope it's a great vaccine, and we wish them the best with that important initiative. And then in the United States, the Warp Speed initiative. So it's a race, and the day that the United States announces that there is a safe and effective vaccine, and those are the two elements one needs to prove before the regulatory agencies, specifically the United States Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, right, would have to conclude that the vaccine is safe and that the vaccine is effective. And the effectiveness optimally is judged by reduced risk of infection with coronavirus in those who receive the vaccine. All right, that's the ultimate gold standard. I mean, we can measure immunologic responses, like did the vaccine induce an antibody, and that's helpful, and it teaches us the science behind how a vaccine might protect. But in the end of the day, does the vaccine do the job or not? Do those receiving the vaccine get protected against the infection? That's what we're aiming for. But vaccines are something that you give healthy people, so they better be damn safe. There's not a lot of tolerance for a lot of reactogenicity or safety concerns. Reactogenicity we allude to as side effects that you may get on the day you get the vaccine, right? It might hurt. Let's say they inject it in your arm, intramuscularly, or IM, as we say. Mm-hmm. You could have local swelling after a vaccine. You could have pain or tenderness in your arm. You might have low-grade fever. Some of this may be tolerable if the vaccine's very otherwise safe and very protective, and it's the best vaccine you've got, then that's a huge success. Obviously, the less discomfort or fever a vaccine causes, the better. And if it causes a lot of discomfort or high fevers, that can be a real problem and might prevent that vaccine from getting approved. So we'll have to reserve judgment and look at what the data look like. And then there's the broader issue of safety. So the reactogenicity is a little more standard, and people know, local swelling in the arm, fever, we understand these things, and they're not infrequent with some vaccines. They're manageable, they go away in a day,
Right.
not a big deal. But
the new shingles vaccine is a pretty tough one.
Yeah. But on the other hand, the broader topic of safety, right? So the reactogenicity, the side effects on the day of the vaccine, that's just a subcategory of the safety. And then there's this broader thing we call safety. Weeks, months, years later, are there side effects attributable to a vaccine? And that's a trickier business. Because if you think about it, vaccines are susceptible to something we call in Latin a post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy of logic, which in Latin means after this, therefore because of this. I got a vaccine and the next day I got hit by a car. I don't mean to trivialize it, but
Right.
ad absurdum, therefore vaccines cause me to get hit by a car. Of course not. But if you give millions of people a vaccine, among those millions of people, some of them unfortunately will have some diseases, many of which they may have had anyway. Even if they never got the vaccine. So we have to be thoughtful and use the right kind of statistical association to see if a vaccine truly is implicated with a side effect, or whether it's getting blamed for something that it should not be blamed for. And we've seen in history many examples where vaccines were blamed for things that they should not have been blamed for, because it wasn't the vaccine, it was likely something else that caused the problem.
Right, but there are long-term effects, and if we're trying to rush to a vaccine, are we going to know what's going to happen 5 years down the line? Is there a way scientifically to try to predict that?
That is an excellent question, Joyce. And the short answer is no. And then I'm going to say that there is a tension between speed and safety at some point, right? Let's label that. Let's be upfront about that. Most vaccine development, if you look across history at all the vaccines we have, most of them took 10 to 20 years to develop. We don't have that kind of time now. So there's tremendous pressure to move things quickly. I believe that the studies that are occurring in the United States, at least the NIH-sponsored ones, it is my personal opinion as a physician scientist and as an expert in the field, that these are very well-designed studies, and that there's going to be a transparency in the data that will allow scientists and physicians and nurses and healthcare professionals across the country and around the world to look at the results and form independent opinions of those results. And there'll be a level of rigor that will give us some sense of confidence that this is, that these vaccines will be helpful and sufficiently safe. But as you point out, well, very long-term potential side effects, there are very few of those that are well documented as caused by vaccines. There are rare examples, but those typically would not be detected in very brief studies. So there will be an element of risk. On the other hand, the risk of contracting the coronavirus and the risk of having severe outcomes from coronavirus is very, very real. And so from a public health perspective, there'll be a line drawn where it says, okay, there's sufficient safety and efficacy data that it is worth moving this forward.
Right, and I mentioned that the shingles shot is a tough shot, and you do get a little fever and discomfort, and I'd still rather have the shot than the shingles. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then another area that our precision vaccines program is very interested in is the concept of bringing precision medicine to vaccines. As your viewers know, precision medicine is the concept that individuals may vary in how they respond to a drug, a medicine, or a vaccine based on their genetics, based on their epigenetics, what they eat, where they live, their sun exposure, the time of year. So many factors impact the human body and how it responds to things. And so in our program, we're looking at the fact that the immune response and the protection from a vaccine can vary dramatically. For example, with the age of the individual. If you give a vaccine to a middle-aged person, it might protect them. That doesn't mean it'll protect a baby or an elderly individual. in the case of coronavirus and the disease it causes, COVID, we know that the elderly are particularly susceptible to contracting severe coronavirus disease or COVID and progressing to intensive care needs or even, God forbid, death. And so the jury is out on these vaccines as to how well they will induce an immune response in the elderly. And I highlight that because we know with other examples, with other vaccines, that protection hasn't always been optimal in the elderly. You know, the elderly should definitely get their flu vaccines. That said, we wish the flu vaccine worked even better in the elderly because the immune system weakens as we age. To put it simply, there's a lot of complex biology behind that, but in short, the immune response to vaccines tends to be less as we age. And so we want to build the right kinds of vaccines that protect vulnerable populations like the elderly. And that's what our precision vaccines program is focusing on. We're looking at immune boosting molecules called adjuvants from the Latin adjuvar, to help or aid. Those are molecules we add to a vaccine like rocket fuel to enhance the immune system's response to the antigen. That's the part your body makes antibodies against. That's very important because another challenge is going to be multi-dose vaccines. If these coronavirus vaccines require multiple doses, it is a huge public health effort to have to give multiple, even giving a single dose to 300 million Americans is not trivial. Giving multiple doses. So adjuvants can help have dose-sparing effects. You could conceivably, with an adjuvant, require only a single dose. That's a huge win. Adjuvants broaden the immune response, maybe resulting in a more protective vaccine, and they may convert a weaker response of an elderly individual to a stronger response and protect our vulnerable populations. And finally, there's a pharmacoeconomic dimension because the antigen, the part that your body responds to, is the expensive part of a vaccine. These small booster molecules, these adjuvants, sometimes allow you to use, for example, 10-fold less antigen. So then that's a huge public health win because the vaccine suddenly becomes much more affordable. And when you have to deliver hundreds of millions or billions of doses around the world, that's huge. So, so in our program, we're studying the immune response of elderly individuals. We have volunteers from all over the Boston area, people over 65 years of age who are donating blood for our research. And then we culture their blood outside the body. We look at the responses of their white blood cells or leukocytes, because those are the cells we really want to tickle, we really want to activate to get a good vaccine response. And we find out which molecules are best at activating that, and those become leads to add to the spike protein antigen and build a super vaccine that would work in older individuals. And that's a major initiative within our precision vaccines program at Boston Children's that's funded by the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
So you mentioned that that you can study these immune responses outside the body. So in little glass dishes in your lab, they say in vitro. So does that speed the research or?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Think about it. If I want to test 10 different candidate vaccines, right? If you and I were in a clinical trial, we couldn't receive all 10 of them. And in fact, either one of us would have to be either a placebo or a treatment condition of some sort of vaccine, right? But if we take some blood from an individual, I can split it into many different parts. So in one individual, that individual in the culture dish outside the body can be the control and 10 different treatment conditions at 10 concentrations. So we can extract a huge amount of information from a little bit of blood. And this is like vaccination in a test tube. And this can help accelerate and de-risk vaccine development. And we can model the response of infants. Remember, infections, you know, children can spread viruses. Can we build a coronavirus vaccine that's optimized for infants? We can model middle-aged individuals. We can model the elderly or pregnant individuals or people in another part of the world, Africa or Asia, that may have different immune responses for a whole variety of reasons, genetically due to different exposures, et cetera. And so we've invented these systems that model human vaccine responses outside the body with the support of NIH, with the support of the Gates Foundation. And we are now poised to help accelerate and de-risk development of vaccines against coronavirus, influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, and others. And this is a very exciting time.
I know you have some young children yourself. So can you help us get some perspective for children? Because with coronavirus, evidently children are not as as much at risk as older people of getting serious complications. So there is a line of thought amongst some people in the US that maybe we should have exposure parties, like they used to have chicken pox parties. Let's just get it over with and let all the kids have chicken pox. But this is not chicken pox, and it also poses risks to older people. So what are the pros and cons of
Right.
immunizing your children before they go back to school, or having them just get it and get it over with?
Yeah, I would say that, look, let's identify the desire of every American to reopen as soon as possible, to get back to some sort of normalcy as soon as possible. These restrictive policies, in my view, are necessary, and we should comply with them. And they're a huge inconvenience, and they come with a lot of downsides. And
Right.
we have to label that. We have to be open about it. And sometimes I feel like we don't discuss it enough. The mental health effects of being closed, the economic effects. Kids need to socialize. Kids need to get outdoors. Kids want to meet other kids, etc. So how do we strike that balance? I'm not in favor of exposure parties or just, quote, get it over with, because we need to flatten the curve. We don't want to overwhelm our hospitals or intensive care units. Also, the more time we buy, the closer we're getting to a vaccine, which can help further change the game. And so it's not just delay the inevitable, because if we can delay enough and a vaccine emerges, that vaccine can help change the equation. And
Right.
that I think is logical. With that, whenever possible, if there are safe ways to reopen, we should. Outdoor dining. My wife and I and our family have been very grateful that outdoor dining is possible. In New England, it's been great in the summer. What is the winter going to look like? Are they going to bring
Right.
those heating lamps and the blankets like you have in Belgium and Europe? Would be great. We'll see
Yeah.
how it plays out, right? Different schools. One of my daughter, University of California, Santa Cruz, she's going to be doing it remotely this fall from home in Cambridge. To her sadness, but she understands it's a safety thing. On the other hand, my middle son, Isaiah, he's at NYU. We just dropped him off this week, and he's going to be in school in person with a lot of, rules and masks and distancing, and hopefully it goes well. We see a lot of concerning headlines about other colleges, and there's a risk that they might need to pull the plug and reclose, but for now, they're trying it in person, and we read him the Riot Act about following the rules. It's a tough sell to a 19-year-old to tell him not to get close to too many other people, but he understands it, and hopefully he'll make the right decisions, and we'll see how that goes. I do praise NYU for trying to make it work. It's not easy. It's hard on everybody involved, the administrators, the building facility managers, the students, the teachers, but if it's done thoughtfully and there are the resources for it, it takes a lot of resources to do this well, let's be honest about that.
Right.
Then it's great. And then my youngest son, Emmanuel, goes to a local private school, and they are trying it in person with small pods, small groups. And then a lot of the public schools locally, I hear, are remote or have some hybrid models. Also, I've heard about some towns in New England where there are hybrid models certain days of the week. This is an experiment. I do think rules are required. We should not have a free-for-all and exposure parties, because those kids, number one, there's some serious coronavirus disease in children, not as frequently as in elderly, but there are severe inflammatory syndromes that can occur in children. I've taken care of some of those kids at Boston Children's Hospital. And as you know, they can spread it to their grandparents and others who are at higher risk. So we have to be careful about that.
Right. So I know that you've been working on vaccines for babies. How do you make sure that a vaccine is going to work in babies? Because for the clinical trials that I've been involved in, they usually say you have to be over 18, you have to not have high blood pressure or diabetes or anything like that. And then, of course, after the drug is approved, guess who's taking it? People with high blood pressure and diabetes and who are under 18. So So how do you go about making sure that a vaccine is safe enough for a baby?
Thank you for that. Well, babies are susceptible to infection, and that's why in early life, if they have the slightest fever, they need to be seen by healthcare providers to make sure they don't have severe infection. And babies around the world are actually, and young infants are the #1 recipients of vaccines, as you know, through the expanded program on immunization. Their early life in Africa and Asia, they're getting the polio vaccine, the BCG vaccine against tuberculosis, and the hepatitis B vaccine, you know. But as you know, safety first, and typically vaccines will be tested in middle-aged adults before we march them down to babies. But we have systems outside the body to try to test the immune response in a baby. And we also have some markers that will tell us if a vaccine might be too inflammatory. So we believe we can predict the reactogenicity, the acute response to a vaccine, and benchmark it. We buy vaccines from the pharmacy, put them right into our in vitro system outside the body, so we can benchmark. We could say the new vaccine, does it induce more or less inflammation than vaccines that are known to be safe? So that benchmarking is very helpful. And Joyce, we could talk about this much more, and I want to.
I know you have a hard stop.
I have a hard
Yeah.
stop. I'm happy if you want in a week or so to do more, but because it's a great topic.
Thank you.
But now I need to leave. And Joyce, thank you for all you do. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Bye-bye. Okay.